So Ethan Klein has responded to my video titled Hila Klein is a terrorist. Now he doesn't actually directly respond because he's very much a coward, but it's very clear that he's talking about my video. And the fact that he hides what I actually say in my video from his audience means that he can make arguments that I refuted in the video itself to them as if they haven't already been refuted before he even made them. Now in my video, I was merely applying Ethan Klein's own standards to his own wife, Hila. But it seems he has changed his standards around a bit now, the same standards that he's previously been using to accuse others of being terrorists. Interesting, right? So let's watch parts of this response and check out his amazing talking points and see if we can refute them. So let's start out with Hila Klein's opening statement on this subject in this clip.
In fact, the lack of nuance, like calling me now a terrorist, like, are we really not going to differentiate it anymore? What's a terrorist and what's not? Because if we can't have like words that we can all agree on, how are we ever going to talk about anything?
Well,
so I think that's a really good point from Hila Klein there. I do agree. We need to have like words where we all sort of agree on the definitions so that we can at least use them in a useful way. Let's look at how Hila Klein uses the word terrorist to see what her actual standard was before it started actually being applied to her. This is Hila Klein talking about when she went on a military raid of a city in the illegally occupied Palestinian West Bank.
To explain, but for some reason it was more interesting. I enjoyed it more.
You told me once you went on like a mission with them to like a terrorist city.
Yeah.
That was kind of a crazy story.
Yeah, my officers and like the
So you can see there, Klein called the entire Palestinian city of Ramallah a terrorist city. Everyone in there was a terrorist for him. Hila didn't disagree with that. She said, yeah. She also said that this raid, which for context is part of a system of terrorism carried out by the IDF against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, where the IDF basically just randomly sends troops into cities in which they are not supposed to be at all, obviously because they're illegal occupiers, and like, you know, raids a random house, takes a random kid, arrests him to scare him a little bit. And for her, the people who she was illegally occupying and did this to were also just terrorists, unambiguously. She calls them terrorists.
Brigade, they would go every night on a raid in Ramallah to arrest terrorists.
To arrest terrorists. I do agree, Ethan and Hila, we should have better definitions for stuff that we all agree on, but it seems like you're backtracking from your earlier definition now that you're being accused of the same thing that you were basically accusing Palestinians of and Yemenis of. And this is a quote from a recent Ethan Klein video where he said that Hassan Piker platformed Houthi terrorist. He is referring to a 19-year-old named Rashid. I don't know what his last name is, but he is a Yemeni Arab man, and Ethan considers him to be a terrorist, even though this man has clarified that he is not even a member of the Houthi organization that Ethan has accused him of being, you know, that he is not a combatant in any way, that he has never done anything that even these people with their incredibly broad, all-encompassing definition of terrorism to mean anyone I don't like is actually encompassed by. But they were happy to call him a terrorist. Why? I think we can guess why. He's Arab. It's really that simple, isn't it? He's Arab. For them, Hila Klein, who admits to going on raids in the occupied West Bank, terrorist raids, who admits to carrying out logistical and organizational activities for the IDF, which is by any reasonable measure a terrorist organization, she's somehow not a terrorist, so we need to dial back the definition and have nuance. But when he is branding his opponents as terrorists and terrorist sympathizers, when he is branding one of the most important cities in all of Palestinian culture as a terrorist city, we don't need that nuance. They're just all terrorists. Anyway, let's continue watching the clip. Let's see what incredible arguments these geniuses have.
Listen, they can call Israeli soldiers terrorists, but like you weren't a soldier. That like it's not. We don't even go that far.
I mean, I think even calling soldiers terrorists is not accurate.
Isn't it, Hila Klein? Isn't that just a convenient definition where, like, apparently any soldier for, like, any state cannot be a terrorist? Okay, Hila, so let's put this to the test then. What about Palestinian resistance soldiers? Are they terrorists by your definition? Given that you called a random guy, like a random kid being arrested by IDF's troops in the occupied West Bank a terrorist, I would bet they are. What about, like, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps? Those ones are even like actual members of a state military, right? They're soldiers, as you put it. Are they terrorists for you? I bet you'd call them terrorists in a second. Suddenly, the goalposts are moved now that the label is being applied to you. But that's Hila Klein's opinion on it. It's not Ethan's. Ethan's opinion was that you have to be a combatant to be a terrorist. Do you believe that, Ethan? I don't think you do at all. For that matter, I don't believe that. I don't think anyone believes that. I don't think that anyone would say that, for example, what Hila's first role in the IDF was, which she said, I'll play the clip just to make sure you know that I'm not lying, just to make sure, because these people love to accuse you of lying, even when you're obviously not. But Hila Klein said that she booked hotels for Israeli officers during Operation Cast Lead. It sounded like Operation Cast Lead, which was an Israeli operation of doing what they call mowing the lawn, which is like strategically terrorizing the people of Gaza periodically, so to sort of keep them downtrodden, keep them from getting too uppity for what the Israelis consider to be acceptable. A precursor to today's Gaza genocide. And she said that her role in the military was to book hotels for Israeli officers who were participating in combat activities or leading combat activities in that operation.
Logistically help with like their hotel or a room, things like that. But it was all on the computer. It just...
So my question here is, would Hila and Ethan Klein consider, say, a member of Hamas who booked hotels for like Hamas military operatives, which they then carried out attacks from, would they consider that person to be a terrorist? They would, obviously. Apply that to literally any other group who they consider terrorist, they would. So I don't think they believe that at all. It's not a sincere belief. They are just randomly deciding on a narrower definition to magically absolve Hila Klein of the terrorist label, which applies way more to her than it does to really any of the people who they are applying it to. And I'd just like to say too, just to be clear, the notion that if you're a soldier or like an official actor of a recognized state or whatever, you cannot be a terrorist is ludicrous on the face of it. It's just an extremely arbitrary way to get out of having a very emotive label applied in a way that legitimizes the activities of states, no matter how abhorrent they may be, and no matter how clearly they may meet the actual definition of terrorism, which under no reasonable definition says anything about whether someone is a state actor or not. For example, we went over the definition of terrorism in United States law: violent acts or acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or any state that would be a criminal violation if committed within the jurisdiction of the United States or of any state, that appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. There's nothing in there about if you're a state actor, you cannot be charged with this, and I don't think there's really any definition of terrorism except ones that people are just sort of arbitrarily making up to try to legitimize the actions of states, or in this case, as just something they came up with in the moment to magically absolve Hila Klein and anyone else who carries out acts of terrorism in the IDF just because it was convenient for them in the moment. But hey, let's see what else they have to say.
But especially me, that was just secretary.
But especially her.
I can see why.
She was just the secretary. So I don't want to play this clip again. I've already played it. But I will give you the gist of it. You can go and check it out yourself if you want, if you haven't seen it yet. I've already gone over it in my last video, that's why I'm not playing it, just to be clear. But Hila Klein said that she was initially booking hotels for IDF members or officers as they were participating in an attack on Gaza, but she found that boring, so she asked to be transferred. And she was transferred to the occupied West Bank, and she liked that job more. And in the occupied West Bank, she says that she was a secretary. What does that mean? A secretary, even if that were true. Secretaries at Nazi concentration camps have been tried and found guilty in Germany. The role of a secretary in a military is going to be organizational, logistical, stuff like that. So she was clearly carrying out activities that are crucial to the actual attacks themselves. They could not happen without people like her, as well as being directly related to them. Again, let's test this. Would Hila Klein consider someone who was technically a secretary working directly under, say, like a Hamas military officer to not be a terrorist? I think you already know that she would consider them a terrorist, right? It's obvious. Like the The test of consistency, the test of if they really believe this or not, takes 2 seconds. And I want to reiterate here again that really anyone who is objectively trying to understand the word terrorism, how most people understand the word, and how it's actually codified into law, all of those would easily encompass as a terrorist someone who is, carrying out organizational and logistical activities for the terrorist attacks, which is what she was doing.
I was just a secretary.
I can see that's at least a defensible position to be like the IDF soldiers. We see them as terrorists. Like, that's defensible at least.
It's not we see them as terrorists by any objective measure of terrorists, and especially the way that you've been using the term. They are absolutely terrorists, especially with the role that Hila Klein was playing in the West Bank. That is explicitly terrorism. Like she was there as part of an illegal occupation with a unit that she herself admitted just does terror raids for the purpose of terrorizing the local population, and she chose to go on one of these raids. There's no question about it. She's a terrorist. In general, not just by like a biologic thing. Some people misunderstood my original video. Hila Klein is not just a terrorist by Ethan's logic. She's a terrorist by any reasonable definition of the term if it was applied equally to non-Arab people, non-white people, Israelis.
You know what I mean? But like, you weren't a fucking soldier.
Again, I already dealt with this talking point. They just seem like they're going to be repeating the same. Honestly, this is like dumb guy YouTube. It's just, I'm going to say the first thing that comes to mind because there's no way that she could ever be a terrorist, right? It's simply not possible. So I'm just going to, my opinion is preconceived. I'm going to defend him no matter what, with just the first stuff that comes to mind on repeat.
You were.
Even I wasn't like a combat.
No, you were a secretary. Like, you did menial fucking work. You were forced to do it.
She was not forced to do it. Again, let's talk about being forced into the IDF. So for one, Hila Klein acknowledged in the original clip that she could have gotten out if she had wanted to, but she didn't because she didn't want to. There are a ton of ways to get out of serving in the Israeli military. A lot. Most people who don't want to serve end up finding some way to get out of it. And she clearly knows this. She clearly believes this because in this podcast clip, she straight up acknowledged that. The context for this is that Hila Klein is saying that her initial desk job where she was booking hotels for IDF terrorists, she found it very boring, so she asked for a transfer. And here is what she said about that in regards to what I was just saying.
It's completely random.
Different
no
position, different post, different location.
So I decided to do that, and if I don't like the second one, then I'll just find a way to get out of the army.
It was that bad?
Yeah.
So she could have found a way to get out of the army. She acknowledged right there she had ways to get out, but she didn't take them because, as she goes on to say, she liked the second position that she had in Ramallah. Ethan said she was forced into it. If I cede them a ton of ground, because just to reiterate here, you are not literally like 100% forced into the Israeli military. You have other options. There are many ways in which you can get out by, like, conscientious objector status, feigning injury, religious beliefs, whatever. And you could also just take a stand and be honest and say, I don't want to do this. And the consequence for that is a few months in prison. So it's a few months in prison versus participating in the genocidal terrorist military. Which one would you choose? Nonetheless, conscription is not a valid excuse for participating in crimes and horrible acts. It never has been, not under law, nor by anyone's morality. I'm sure these two have no sympathy whatsoever for anyone who has been conscripted into, say, ISIS or any other group like that factually conscripts people for what everyone considers to be terrorism, whether they are a combatant or whether they are in an organizational role, as Hila Klein was. But it's magically an all-absolving excuse. But it is magically an all-absolving excuse for her, even though she has acknowledged that she could have gotten out if she had really wanted to. So there is another clip where Ethan Klein brings up what I think is really the classic dumb guy talking point in matters like this. It's the sort of thing that most of us would probably think of in the very first moment that we ever actually ask this question to ourselves. And Ethan Klein seemed to be going through that experience right here in real time. So let's bring that up. I just want to note that the framing of this by the Twitter account that I'm going to use to play this clip is very funny. Holy shit! Ethan just destroyed pro-Hamas leftists who constantly shit on Hila for being in the IDF. If you're American and want Israel to stop being armed by the US, don't pay your taxes then. This is the sort of thing that can only seem like an incredible talking point to you if you are very dumb, or if you haven't thought about it for more than about 5 seconds. But let's play the clip.
Let's say people are so easy to judge Hila for doing mandatory service in Israel, right?
They keep lying about, like, the mandatory service. They keep saying that. That's the reason why they didn't watch my video, because then they would have had to like shown me dissecting the video of Ethan and Hila discussing her so-called service in the IDF terrorist organization. They would have seen me talking about it, providing context to it, and made it clear that that is just a lie. She had a desk job, and she asked to be transferred to something else. She said that if she didn't like the second job, she would have left. The second job was doing direct occupation in the West Bank, organizing terrorist activities for the IDF, going on raids with the IDF against occupied Palestinians. She liked it, so she chose not to leave. She wasn't forced there. She asked for the transfer there. She openly said she thought it was an adventure. She thought it was way more fun. She liked it more. But the talking point on the face of it is invalid in general, and it's especially invalid in Hila's case because it is just simply lying. It's leaving out so much of what she actually did, as well as her own acknowledgement that she could have gotten out if she wanted to.
Everybody goes, you know what? If I was there, I would have objected. I would have chosen to go to jail and be ostracized by society because I am morally superior. I would take any punishment.
This is also a great talking point here because you can use it to absolve pretty much anyone of anything, right? What if an 18-year-old is like sort of pressured into joining the mafia and doing hits, for example? Are they guilty of the murder or not? Or do the circumstances and this idea that, hey, not everyone would be able to say no to what they did, does that magically absolve them? Would they get out of the crime if they said that in court? Would they get out of being a criminal in the eyes of Ethan and Hila if that was their excuse? No, they wouldn't. Of course not. It's just, again, they're coming up with excuses in the moment because they just want to come up with arbitrary reasons for why Hila is apparently not guilty of a crime, terrorism, for which Ethan accused like a random guy for whom there was literally no evidence of him ever being involved in anything that can be construed as terrorism, even remotely as strong as there is for Hila. Ethan was trigger happy with that label. He was trigger happy with calling people like Hassan terrorist sympathizers. But now we got to think of the circumstances. Now we got to think of like the social context behind all of this. The social context that just so happens to absolve Israelis, and specifically his Israeli wife, for carrying out crimes against Palestinians that bring them great material advantage and comfort, and that almost all of them support. Isn't it just super convenient that you have all these people who commit horrid crimes against Palestinians or who help to commit them, and yet almost none of them are actually responsible for it? How about we apply that logic to the Nazis? Do you think Ethan Klein would like that? Do you think he would like this notion that, hey man, they were forced into the Holocaust? Hey man, that secretary at the death camp, she was in a non-combat role. She was forced into it. She was conscripted. Come on, man. They don't believe what they're saying. You need to remember that with people like this. That's why they didn't show my video, because they are being dishonest. They have to avoid the counter-arguments. They have to take every effort to make sure their audience does not actually see what they are responding to, because these are the sorts of people who would lose a debate to an inanimate video if they tried to respond to it live. I'm telling you, they would not be able to do it. I wouldn't even need to be there for my video pre-recorded to beat these two in a debate. It is that bad.
So here's a challenge to you guys. If the US government is buying bombs for Israel and funding the genocide, stop paying taxes. You can be that conscientious objector. Stop paying taxes. If you don't want to support the funding and you're willing to put yourself, on the line, like you saying Hila should have, stop giving the government their taxes.
Go to jail. See
what happens. You should be willing to make that risk and that sacrifice. Right? I don't see the difference. So just stop paying taxes and see what.
I don't see the difference.
What happens? And we'll all be very happy and proud of you for going to jail for not paying taxes.
Now, this is the sort of thing that can only seem like an amazing talking point to you, as I said, if you are extremely dumb. And Ethan Klein absolutely fits that bill. He is a dumb guy YouTuber. That is the best description of him and others like him, the commentary drama sort of YouTubers. They are dumb guys. And when they fail to stay in their lane, it becomes very apparent. So let's think about that for a second. Is paying taxes on the same level of responsibility as being in the military? Does anyone actually believe that? Does Ethan Klein actually believe that? No, he doesn't. No one believes that. If you're on the front lines raiding a Palestinian house or helping to organize that raid on the Palestinian house after asking to be transferred there, no less, are you the same as someone not doing that, but who is paying taxes that fund that? Are you on the same level of responsibility? Are you on the same level of proximity to the acts? No, you obviously are not. And while we're on that topic, is the punishment the same? The punishment for not paying taxes is actually a whole lot worse than refusing service in the IDF. You don't pay taxes, everything that you own or have ever owned is going to be seized. And you're going to go to prison for an absurdly long time, all while you are not even remotely close on the same level of responsibility as someone who's literally in the military. Those taxes also fund a plethora of other things that are not the military. Whereas obviously, being in the military, we all know what the military is for. In Israel, the military is for terrorizing, genociding, killing Palestinians. They especially like to kill children and babies, don't forget that. Firstly, the punishment for avoiding service in the Israeli military for most people who avoid service is nothing, because they get out on some sort of exemption. One of the exemptions that Hila Klein herself said in that clip that we went over that she could have leveraged for herself if she had wanted to. 2, for those who want to get out of serving, but who nonetheless somehow can't figure out an exemption that applies to them, the punishment is a couple of months to a year in prison. So you can spend a year, 2 years of your life assisting with a genocidal military that massacres children in droves, or you can choose to spend a couple of months to a year in what, for Israelis who do not endure the same horrid prison conditions that Israelis inflict on Palestinians, is a relatively fine prison. Obviously, it's still a prison, but it is not even remotely close to the prison conditions that they inflict on their Palestinian hostages. To give you an example of this, let's look at a very recent case, Tal Mitnick, an 18-year-old Israeli who refused service in the IDF this year during the Gaza genocide. Mitnick spent a total of 6 months in prison and then he was exempted from service. As a result of his refusal, he is now an influential activist known around the world. He has gained a significant profile on social media, and if he so chooses, he's going to be set for life as an influencer as a result of doing this. Ethan and Hila basically made it sound like the dude would be killing himself or something, but honestly, he's better off now than he was before as a result of doing the right thing here. Compared to killing babies or helping people kill babies, he definitely made the right choice. For himself as well. Not even just for the potential people that he might have helped to kill. War is dangerous. Even if you're not exactly on the front lines, you can be risking your life. 6 months in a prison cell, in comparison, even out of self-interest, doesn't sound so bad. So if the balance of things is allow myself to be conscripted and kill babies, or attempt to get out of serving, which, as Hila noted, is relatively easy, especially for women like her, and in the worst case scenario, go to prison. Would you choose to help kill the babies, or would you choose one of the other options? I would hope that you would not choose the killing babies thing, because, if you do choose that option, it is fair to blame you. I have never, ever seen anyone say, ever, that conscripts in militaries that commit horrid crimes should be exempted from being blamed for committing those crimes. I've never really seen that argument in any real practical case, except with people who want to excuse IDF soldiers, really. You can always just say, let's apply this logic to the Holocaust and see how it does, and make these sorts of people wince, because they know that they can't respond to that sort of argument. Nonetheless, I want to make abundantly clear here, I'm repeating this again and again and again, because people just ignore it and they post like, come on, IDF people are conscripted. You're so disgusting and for, oppressing the poor IDF conscripts by saying that they're actually responsible for their actions, that they're human beings who have a choice. It may be a limited spectrum of choice, but they still do have a choice. Even if I was to accept that argument, Hila Klein initially had a desk job booking hotels for terrorists. She found that not fun enough, so she asked for a more direct role, closer to the terrorist attacks in both responsibility and physical proximity, while acknowledging that she could have leveraged some of the ways to get out if she had really wanted to, but did not. So we're not even talking about someone who was just conscripted and did the initial role that they were given, they were so-called forced into. We're talking about someone who went well beyond that, who talked about their victims as if they were like cattle or animals. Ethan literally calls Palestinians it. I forgot to mention this last time. Ethan literally says it to refer to the random Palestinian in Ramallah who was kidnapped by the IDF.
But surrounded with them, so...
Okay. Did they arrest anyone that night?
They did.
Did they bring it in the same car with you?
No.
Oh.
Did they bring it, the arrested Palestinian, did they bring it in the same car as you? So let's ask some questions here to finish this up. Is paying taxes the same as being in a genocidal, terrorist, imperialist military like that of Israel? Is it the same? No, obviously not. If you boil the question down to what it really is, which is a few months in a cell versus shoot babies in the head, or at least help the guys who are shooting the babies in the head, and yes, that is what the IDF does, I'm not going to beat around the bush and pretend they don't, then yeah, you can be blamed for not choosing the prison instead. Absolutely. The question of, if you guys were in that situation, maybe you wouldn't have been moral enough to choose the right choice or whatever, blah, blah, blah. You know what? Maybe some of the people watching wouldn't have. But you mistake explanation for excuse. This is what a lot of people do. They use an explanation as to like why these people end up in the positions that they are in as an excuse for what they end up doing. But there is no standard of morality, no standard of law, of justice anywhere in the world where anyone really thinks in that way, where anyone would accept that as really a valid argument. They might accept it as like a mitigating circumstance for sentencing, but they wouldn't accept it as like something that totally absolves a person of responsibility for what they have done. A great example from this whole controversy is Ethan himself, who, again, treated Rashid, the 19-year-old Yemeni, as a terrorist because, he supports the Houthi government of Yemen. Ethan is so willing to empathize with Israeli soldiers who, again, are terrorists, actual terrorists, not like Rashid. Yet for Rashid, the Arab guy, he can't apply that sort of thing where he's like, well, I'm going to think about how this guy came to be who he is. I'm going to think about the explanation for how he got there. I'm going to think about why he thinks the way he does, why he does the things that he does. For the genociders, the terrorists, the Israeli genocidal soldiers, and the crucial operational and logistical employees who help them out in the carrying out of their genocide and their terrorism, he's all about empathy. He's all about deflecting blame. Random 19-year-old Arab who happened to be born in Yemen, who grew up during a genocide, during a civil war, he takes the gloves off immediately. And what else is there to say about this? These people are not honest. If they were honest, they would have shown my video to their fans. If they were honest, they would hop on and talk to me about this, rather than speaking about it in an isolated environment where no one can push back against the stuff they're saying in real time. Ethan wouldn't intentionally go after people with, fewer followers who he knows are perhaps less capable, less well-versed in this than I am, while avoiding me, when clearly, by the fact that they talked about this, they have seen my video or at least know of its existence. So yeah, all in all, it's bullshit, man. It's double standards out the wazoo. Sorry for using that word, but you get a chance to use the word wazoo, you got to take the opportunity, right? And not just that. I'm not going to pretend it really is just double standards, because I hate when we compare things that aren't comparable and act as if they are. It's not comparable to be a 19-year-old Yemeni man who has sympathies for the Houthis and to be an IDF soldier or IDF secretary, as Hila Klein described it, in the West Bank or any other thing that the IDF does. Because there's no comparison to the IDF. Nothing. You can't compare anything else to the IDF. They are horrid. They're carrying out a genocide right now. Their soldiers are there intentionally shooting children in the head. They're burning people alive as we speak. I'm not going to pretend it's the same thing. I'm not going to pretend that we're comparing comparable things here. I'm not going to cede that ground to Ethan, and no one should. Because it's not just that by his own standards, Hila Klein is a terrorist. It's by objective standards that really everyone abides by when we use that word. By those, Hila Klein is a terrorist, and any attempt to absolve her of that label is arbitrary, totally arbitrary, emotional, not coming from any form of logic or any form of consistently applied principles. The only reason the IDF is not a globally declared terrorist organization, like this same sort of organization if it were Iranian and doing the same things that the Israeli military does would be, is because obviously the West are the allies of Israel. Again, I will reiterate here, even though they are too cowardly for it, talk to me anytime. Please prepare your best talking points, or send a research team to research into me and try to devolve it into personal attacks or whatever it is that you guys do. Why don't you actually open yourself up to a little bit of scrutiny, man? Why don't you actually stop being a coward? Or, how about we go further than that? Why don't you admit that you were wrong? Why don't you write an apology, a sincere apology to Rashid, 19-year-old genocide victim who you smeared as a terrorist? You should have some humility. Admit that you were wrong. Admit that you were wrong to deplatform Arab creators for saying that Israeli hummus is shit. Admit that you were in way over your head and you don't know what you are doing. At least be like moist critical, though you're nowhere near as funny or charismatic as him. At least be like him and know when you should stay in your lane. Know not to get too far in over your head, because there are way too many of these dumb guy YouTubers who are not as intelligent as moist critical on that sort of thing, and they just constantly get themselves in way over their head, make themselves look like morons. And this is one of the few times where someone's actually properly being called out for it. Like the Some Ordinary Gamers video on this, which maybe I should respond to eventually as well too, is so dog shit terrible. But you know, do I really want to put more effort into this slop content that I'm currently producing regarding this whole controversy by going over more of it, you know, more dumb guys talking about the same exact subject? Not really. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about that phenomenon at the end of this video as well, because it is very dumb. What better way to describe it? These people are just very dishonest. They're incredibly dishonest, incredibly inconsistent. They clearly don't have principles or beliefs. I think Hila Klein just believes that he's like a good guy. Like he believes that he's a morally good guy. So whatever it is that he believes is morally good, and anyone who like responds to him and is like, actually, no, what you believe is pretty shit, man. That's bad. He believes that, you know, they must have some sort of impure motivation, like anti-Semitism, to say something like that to him. Because he's a good guy, right? He's a good guy. He can't do bad. He can't say bad things. He can't support bad things. His wife could never do bad things. And yeah, that's my assessment of how they basically got where they are right now, up shit creek without a paddle. But unfortunately, in that quest to traverse the creek of feces, they have legitimately hurt lots of people and legitimately hurt the anti-Palestinian cause, to the point that in some respects they have legitimized anti-Palestinian propaganda, and they are certainly responsible for more harm being done to Palestinians in Gaza as a result of that. And I hope, even though I don't think it will, because I don't think they have a conscious enough to even realize this, I hope that keeps them up at night. I hope they see the Palestinian children who will be harmed more due to their actions in their dreams.